Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Today let's look at the Pathamasukha Sutta. This is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 10, discourse number 65. It's a sutta on happiness and a way of contemplating the distinction between happiness and suffering. And in this instance, it's Venerable Sāriputta who is correcting our view or activating the right view. The sutta begins and says, on one occasion, the Venerable Sāriputta was dwelling among the Magadhans at Nalaka Gamaka. Then the wanderer Sāmaṇḍakāni approached the Venerable Sāriputta and exchanged greetings with him. When they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, he sat down to one side and said to the Venerable Sāriputta, "Friend Sāriputta, what is happiness? What is suffering?" Rebirth, friend, is suffering. No rebirth is happiness. When there is rebirth, this suffering is to be expected. Cold, heat, hunger, thirst, defecation and urination, being afflicted by fire, sticks or knives, and relatives and friends get together and scold one. When there is rebirth, this suffering is to be expected. When there is no rebirth, this happiness is to be expected. No cold, no heat, no hunger, no thirst, no defecation and no urination, no being afflicted by fire, sticks or knives. And relatives and friends don't get together and scold one. When there is no rebirth, this happiness is to be expected. Although this sutta is quite short, it's very powerful and piercing, because immediately when you look at the subject matter for the contemplation, the subject matter is immediately correcting the view. So if you believe or have an understanding that there is no rebirth, then you are not practicing with the right view. And that is one of the most powerful things about this teaching, if you just begin there. Now, if you do have the right view and you understand about karma and rebirth, then this meditation is very powerful because it gets straight to the point. Our minds are very prone, through the magician in the mind, to discount all the things that we are troubled by. It tends to pick and choose all the good things and all the distractions. It tends to link up all the pleasure-seeking moments. And so we forget and we don't see what is really going on. Now, right now, with challenging conditions, it's very hard to distract from the fact that there is suffering, that there is stress and pain and all kinds of difficulties. So this is a very opportune time to do this particular meditation, because we can't turn away from what it is really like. Venerable Sāriputta is asking us to reflect on rebirth is suffering. So the point of reference is the suffering that we are going through right now. So in the case of Venerable Sāriputta, he refers to cold and heat. This seems quite obvious. The body cannot withstand certain types of temperatures, extreme cold and extreme heat. But if you bring it back to your own example, so for example, if you live in a cold climate and you don't have heating, then you experience the direct result of cold being suffering. Now, if you're in the heat and you have to go through power cuts, no energy to supply power, what happens is you realize there's no air conditioning, there's no fan, and so you directly experience what it's like to suffer when there is heat. Or if you work and you have to work in particular climate and you're exposed to the elements, again, there is suffering. Then when it comes to hunger and thirst, we don't often look at hunger and thirst from the lens of suffering. What we think is, if we're hungry, we eat. If we're thirsty, we drink. Those things are available. You can go to the fridge or you can go to the shop. But we don't think about it in the instances where you cannot solve those illnesses. So when there is a food emergency, when you're in the war zone, when you are stranded somewhere, when you don't have access to these things. In samsara, these are the things that we get afflicted by. And even when you do have access to these things, when you leave it to a certain point and you're way over the hunger point, but you haven't solved that particular dilemma, then you experience the suffering. Same with thirst. You could be traveling and you need to get to a place and you haven't got there yet, and that's where the food and drink is, and so you know what that is like. Now when it comes to defecation and urination, In the first instance, it's pretty miserable to always have to worry about the toilet. That's just one thing. The second thing is it's always troubling, suffering when you have issues around using those facilities. The body doesn't often operate well. As it ages, you tend to notice more. But even young or old, most people have certain problems around number 1 and number 2. So you often hear people saying, I'm having difficulty, I've got constipation, or if you eat something or something doesn't agree with you and you have the runs. So urination and defecation is actually suffering. It's just that we don't tend to notice it, we don't tend to focus on it, but it is indeed something that does trouble us. And as we age, if you speak to older people, it gets worse. The other way also to think about it is when you're traveling and you always need to think about where can I find a toilet. People often sometimes don't drink when they're on a road trip and it's difficult to find toilets in particular areas. And so the suffering that comes when you're busting to go, or you really need the toilet, you can't find one, or you need to go in the bush, particularly if you're a woman and you have to crouch down and things, then you know what that's like. It's not fun. Or you find a toilet and it's not clean. So these are all the different things that we blot out, or we try and make jokes around. But really, when you pull away all the jokes that we make, all the different things that we say to ourselves, it's right there. Even when you're a child, the fact that you have to depend on parents to do that for you up until a particular age, that's not particularly fun either. In fact, that's quite a painful process. And then Venerable Sāriputta lists out things such as fire, sticks, or knives. So these are the things that we are subject to. Now with fire, you can expand that to floods, to other strong winds, thunder, lightning, all kinds of natural disasters. And when it comes to sticks or knives, then to be attacked, to be harmed, to be at the mercy of someone else's anger. So these are the things that we don't often think about. During times of famine, during times of distress, what you find is people do get scared for their lives. So when conditions get very difficult, so when you're in the war zone, for example, people are worried about getting attacked, raped, harmed, hurt. When there is extreme poverty in a neighborhood, people start worrying about being robbed, about being attacked in their homes, about things getting stolen. So these are the things that occur. Now, we don't often think about it that way. Same with relatives and friends getting together and scolding us. We often think about only the good times, unless there is something very powerful or very immediate and present. But quite often when you hear about families and groups of friends, there's always squabbling. There's always disputes, anger, animosity, envy, jealousy, competition. Groups of people normally breed defilements. Intimacy normally breeds defilements. Buddha often recommends that if you're on the spiritual path, that if you can't find Kalyanamitta or Sappurisa, good people, then it's often good to be alone, because then you are away from arguments, from disputes that trouble the mind. But this is the nature of coming back into the world. So when you're really honest, you really bring your own examples and you look at this existence, you see that it is very much bound to greed, hatred, and delusion. And what you're trying to do with the contemplation, that rebirth is suffering, is to really look at the present life, because that is the direct experience that we know. And when you look at it, you really see what the Buddha, and in this particular case, Venerable Sāriputta, is saying to us. If we come back to another life, then this is what we can expect, or worse. If we were to come back to a human life, then you know that you are subject to hunger, thirst, defecation, urination. That's it. If you develop this kind of body, reborn into this kind of body, then that's a given. Those are the first 4 illnesses that are a given. And Buddha definitely calls them illnesses. We're afflicted by hunger and thirst. We have no choice. We're afflicted by defecation, urination because of hunger and thirst. We have no choice. We have this kind of body. So what is very useful when you do this contemplation is to really look at your personal circumstances right now. Really use that as your meditation object. particularly if you suffer. If you find the conditions very difficult, then that's what you use. So if you're experiencing power cuts, if you're experiencing children who don't want to listen to you, if you're experiencing arguments with your parents, if you're experiencing challenges at work, deadlines, if you're experiencing financial worries, if you experience personal safety issues, if you're experiencing a court case, if you're experiencing isolation, loneliness, whatever it is that you're experiencing right now that is difficult, it's really good to look at it in the context of Dhamma, not to go into moaning about it, lamenting about it, but to really see it from the perspective of what I'm experiencing right now is possible for me to experience if I'm reborn into another body. And that is suffering, that is dukkha, that is what Venerable Sāriputta is talking about. That is what the Buddha is talking about. So the question you ask in your meditation is do I want to pursue this? Because when you are bound to rebirth, you're transmigrating from life to life, then all you can expect is First Noble Truth, the Noble Truth of suffering. And in that way it can be very powerful because the mind does have a tendency to block out what this predicament really is. Right view is really understanding karma and rebirth. And Venerable Sāriputta is making that very strong point. When you contemplate, you really contemplate with that in mind. It corrects the view. It makes you see what you can't usually see. It removes the darkness, the clouds that are clouding the mind. The deluded mind often thinks, oh, this life is really good. You often think about when all the conditions are near perfect, when you feel that they're normal, when you feel that everyone's getting along, when you don't feel that you have financial worries or any of those sorts of things, where traveling becomes easy, visiting people is easy, access to things are easy, the temperature is controllable. The magician in the mind is often telling us that we have control over our conditions when we really don't. We have no control over old age, sickness and death, so what's the chances of us having control over anything else? It's impossible. So that's the first part of the contemplation. The second part of the contemplation is really around when there is no rebirth. So we don't know what that is really like because we are still bound to samsara. There's still craving to experience through our senses, craving out of ignorance. In this meditation, Venerable Sāriputta is giving us the instructions. If there is no rebirth, then everything that we contemplated initially around the suffering, so around cold, heat, hunger, thirst, defecation, urination, all the rest of it, when there is none of that, then that is what Venerable Sāriputta is saying is happiness. So just then, when you went into whatever is troubling that came to your mind as the example, your direct experience, so financial worries, problems with the family, problems at work, problems with natural disasters, the war, whatever it is, economic issues in your country. So you're contemplating that as if I was reborn, then there's more of that to come. I'm bound to that. So when you understand that, everything that you contemplated, if you were to say, no rebirth means none of that. So the contemplation or the meditation is really to then not wanting to come back, not wanting to think that if you come back that you only experience pleasure, happiness, but you really see from your direct experience what it's really like. Those ideal conditions with family members and friends, it's hollow because have we ever seen families or groups of friends that never fight, never experience dukkha because of aging, sickness and death? The answer is no. And same with cold and heat. Have we ever been able to control the weather, like fully control the weather? The answer is no. So we are going to be subject to difficult conditions. Have we ever been able to control hunger and thirst? And the answer is no. Have we ever been able to control defecation and urination? And again, the answer is no. We have no control over these things. So when there is no rebirth, and the fact that there is no cold, heat, hunger, thirst, no defecation, no urination, there is peace, there is happiness. We can understand where Venerable Sāriputta is pointing to. So when there is no rebirth, that's the ultimate safety. We are not subject to natural disasters. We are not victims of war and the things that happen during war. We are not subject to all the issues around families and groups of people. We're not subject to financial woes. None of those things. We're not subject to having to maintain houses and look after our assets. We're not subject to the whims of government, to economic worries. We are not held to ransom by our managers or bosses. We don't have to worry about employees and people that work for us, or prone to injury, harm. If there is no rebirth, this is what we contemplate. None of those things come to fruition. And so that is what supreme happiness is really about. Supreme safety, supreme sanctuary. So when you meditate, that is what you do. You really look at the first part of the contemplation. So you see that directly for yourself. And then the second part of the contemplation is when you are free of that. If you come back into any type of existence, so lower realm, most obvious, you suffer greatly. Come into human existence, well, you suffer, because we've just already seen that in the contemplation. If you go to other realms, you still suffer. So you might experience higher happiness, but it's not supreme happiness, because ultimately you're still in samsara, you're still bound to rebirth. So when you fall, if you haven't made enough punya, although it's a long time in some of those different realms, you still suffer. We have read suttas, we've studied suttas where devas, they suffer as well, particularly when they are knowing that they're going to be reborn again, falling from the deva realms. So the supreme safety for us is really to see this truth, to correct the view, and to work towards stream entry, once return, non-return, and then arahantship, because the true safety, the true sanctuary is only with nibbana, no rebirth. But the reason why stream entry is very important and progress thereafter is because you limit the amount of dukkha. So at this time, if you're going through a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of stress, financial worries, all that kind of thing, it's really important to clarify one's intention. The Buddha promotes stream entry very much in the suttas because it offers some safety, like an insurance coverage, because you limit yourself to a maximum of 7 rebirths. At this time, many people are scrambling to change their conditions, to find better conditions. But the problem is that you are the owner of your karma, heir to your karma, so you're bound to it. No matter where you move, you still experience dukkha. That's the nature of rebirth. So we can swap temporarily uncomfortable conditions for slightly better ones, but ultimately the conditions are essentially the same. We're still subject to old age, sickness and death. And that is the other part of the contemplation that Venerable Sāriputta hasn't referred to in his answer here, but it's built in. Rebirth means that we are subject to old age, sickness and death. So when we don't accept aging, we don't accept sickness, we don't accept death, there's something wrong about that view. And if you think that it's morbid or something of that nature, then really look at that, because when you meditate with an acceptance and understanding, with wisdom, insight towards aging, sickness and death, the mind becomes peaceful. It becomes calm because it knows, I don't need to fight this. So we can take Venerable Sāriputta's answer to the question about what is happiness and what is suffering. This is just one example of where Venerable Sāriputta answers in this way. And we can use it as a contemplation. It's a very good meditation. When you meditate as much as possible on the first part about what is suffering, that rebirth is suffering. You take your own direct experience, meditate on it with your own examples. You really start to see. You don't need to be compelled. You see it for yourself. With the right view, it's very compelling, very powerful. And then when you take the second part of the meditation, no rebirth is happiness. There's a release there. There's a freedom that comes in the mind. Somehow when you do this meditation, the pressure cooker that is there right now in the mind, where we're holding everything tightly together, trying to get through this period, there's something in the meditation that releases. There's something that's very helpful in this meditation. With the right view, it helps to alleviate some of the mental suffering that we hold on to and we don't know that we're holding on to. And so it makes it easier to deal with things when we come out of the meditation, to see it more clearly, to have a bit of space around some of those worries, whether they're financial worries, safety issues, afflictions due to certain views about things in the world. So this meditation can be very useful. Give it a chance. Give it an opportunity to activate the right view and see where you go with that. So we can end the session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Wishing you well. Peruan Saranai.